Well, hey guys, it's time to continue building the Enterprise. Well, hey guys, and welcome back. This is now part 2 of my 1/1000 scale Enterprise build, and I plan on completing the model kit in this video. Just to get you caught up with a couple things that I've done since the last video. First, I did install the lights now for the secondary hull, and that is just in preparation for assembling things together now. And one thing to bear in mind is that all of these lights now come with these little tags with letters, and it's important that you keep those tags on those wires so that you know which wire connects to where. The other thing that I did was assemble the two halves of the primary hull, and did run into a little bit of a hiccup, all my fault. If you look here, the top half of the primary hull does come with this groove, and it's in that groove that you can place the glue. Now, you figure after all this time I would have learned not to put too much glue, but unfortunately that is what happened when I clamped the two halves together. Like you see here, some of it oozed through. So because the seam was looking inconsistent, I did have to end up filling it, and I just wanted to show you a little trick that I did for painting. What you see here is a series of curled pieces of masking tape that were placed along the perimeter. Now, although I was using the same color as the rest of the primary hull, I was very satisfied with the way the top and bottom portions were looking, and I just didn't want any excess spray on them. So by putting the tape on this way, it kept me from having to mask off the entire primary hull or to have to cut curved pieces to fit along the edge of the entire perimeter of the hull. If you happen to get some paint through, it doesn't matter because it will look feathered and it just blends right in. So I did end up filling in all the windows with liquid mask just to protect them, and it took a little bit of work to conceal that seam, but it's all said and done and I'm ready to move forward. Now, if you do this right, you really wouldn't have to address that seam. I think the line that is there fits in quite nicely with all the rest of the lines and detailing that are on the side of the primary hull. So I don't think this is something that you necessarily have to do. So now that all that is done, let's go ahead and move forward. All right, so these are the two halves, and I've got the wires grouped together here. These are the ones that are going to hook to the circuit board. The nacelles actually weren't very difficult to slide in. You just have to, as you see here in this shot, feed the wires through carefully and then gradually slide in the strut. And when all said and done, it was actually fairly simple to do. And one thing I wanted to show you real quick before I move on is the shuttle bay doors. Now, this comes clear, and what I did was I painted it with the gunmetal color. I did have to light block it from the interior, and what you have here then is a light that feeds into it via this hole. And I taped off these two rectangular areas here, and underneath that I applied some red and green clear Tamiya paint. So I'm hoping that once this all lights up, we'll get at least a little bit of a glow through those rectangles. And I also left a couple of open areas, some slits along the backside, and we'll see how that lights up once everything is together. So I have the two sets here, and I'm going to go ahead and piece this together. There will be a seam at the bottom. I'm going to see how heavy that seam is. What I may do is just try to smooth it out a bit, but not really work too hard on it, since we're going to have some decals that are going to hide that seam. Okay, so I have the primary hull resting up against here. As you can see, I've got them connected now, the G and the F wire. And then we've got one connection between the two halves. That's a D and F connection. Everything else is going to head out over that way, out towards the main deflector dish. Now, as you can see, again, just a comment about these thick wires, this is going to be a little of a challenge to get all this stuffed in there, and then we've got to hook all this to the circuit board and then push everything back in. So I'm going to give this a shot here. I'm going to go ahead and apply some adhesive along the two halves and bring the primary hull down and see if I can get all this together here now. It's a pretty tight fit, but with some careful maneuvering I was able to get everything in there, and I did test it and everything is lighting up. So I have this seam to address here. You can see there's a bit of a gap there just at the very bottom. I tried my best to close that, got a little bit of glue unfortunately right there. But once I get that done, we'll move on to the decals. Well, before filling in the seam, I wanted to go over my plans regarding the display base and the stand. And this is one part of the model that I think could have been better designed. If you look here in this video, you'll see that there is a slot for the tube that's provided with the model kit. And you can see right there where the wires go into the model, that's about as deep as it goes. So it's fairly shallow. The problem with that is when you insert your tube, there's not a lot to grab onto, and that makes things pretty wobbly. Now, I believe the way Boyd addressed this problem was that he took his Dremel and was able to clear away that hole a bit more and insert this a little deeper, and then he used two-part epoxy to secure all that. However, because the model now is all assembled, I didn't want to try to clear anything away with these wires here, and I didn't want to have to pry the model apart again. Now, admittedly, this could have been better handled had I thought about this before assembling the two halves. However, I completely forgot about it. So that being the case now, I decided to go with this idea, and that is to insert a piece of plastic tubing that I had on hand into that slot, and I secured everything with two-part epoxy, so it's nice and tight now. And I'm using a 4.76 millimeter brass tube instead, because that slides easily now into that tubing. It's a pretty good fit, and I'll secure that further with two-part epoxy as well. Now, the display base that comes with the model is this one here. It's the same one that's included with the 1/350 scale Enterprise. And the instructions say that you should just take your battery pack and place it on the outside and activate the lights with this on and off switch there. However, I'd like to have everything enclosed underneath the stand, and there's plenty of room to accommodate for that. So I'm just going to clear away a couple of these supports. And I am going to bypass that switch so that it won't have to reach under the model for it, and add yet another switch that we'll be able to push here, and that's what will activate the light. So I'll just leave this on the on position there and add that other switch here. Now, the hole that's provided here is obviously the same diameter as the original tube, but because this tube is a bit more narrow, I'm going to use two-part epoxy putty to help secure that into place, and we should get a nice firm hold there as well. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to try this little tool I found at a miniature show a couple years ago. This is a modified syringe, and it has this bent top that allows you to apply products in a very precise manner. Alright, so before we get into decals, I wanted to again mention that depending on when you purchase your decal sheet, and I purchased mine early on, the instructions could be wrong. So you want to double check with round 2 to be sure that you've got the correct instructions. I'll put the link below on where you can email to find out. But you'll see that these are the instructions that I got with mine. These are now the instructions that round 2 sent to me. And position it here like this. You can see that the numbers now that have been changed are in this violet color. So for example, if you go along the nacelles, you have 55 and 54, 66 and 65 with this upper section here. And if we look at the decal instructions that we've got going on here, instead we have 59 and 70 versus 55 and 66, and 58 and 69 that you see on the bottom part there versus 54 and 65. So there are definitely differences going on there, and it's not only just with this section, but there are differences with some of the other sections too. Let me scroll to the other ones. You can see this is the top section now. We've got all of these that are outlined now in violet or purple, and then we've got the other sections here, the side views, that you can see various decals again have been renumbered. Okay, so before we get started here, I wanted to make note that I did print these. This is the instruction sheet I got from Polar Lights, and if by chance you can't get a hold of them, let me know. I'm going to upload these to my Google Drive, and I'm more than happy to forward them to any of my subscribers here for free, of course. So that is available. Now, as you note here, there's a little box that says pink number corrections correspond to this date code, and the rest is cut off. But what they're pointing to is this barcode here, and right at the bottom is a date that they have circled. The number is 05222020. So if you have that barcode, that means that those instructions need to be replaced. So make sure you look at that and let me know if you need a copy of those. Alright, so I'm going to begin now with the bottom half of the primary hull, and the reason for that is because we can position the model this way and not have to worry about decals we've already applied on the top had we done that. So we're going to position the model like this. I have it resting on a couple of old spools of masking tape just to take the pressure off the nacelles resting against the surface here. And I have the primary hull balanced on this other thing of masking tape there. I have my water set over that way. I've got setting solutions. I'm sure you're familiar with Microsol and Microset, and I have them numbered here for you, 1 and 2. You use this solution first and then this second. This helps the decal to set into place, and then this actually softens the decal so it can conform to the surface of our model here, since we've got all these panel lines and so forth. We want to make sure that it conforms to the contour properly. So we'll be using these. And the decal sheet now, all of the sections are separated, so all you have to do is cut them out and place them in the water. However, with these in particular, several modelers now have recommended that you split these up, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to split the darker triangular sections from the bottom and apply them that way. And also directing you back over to Star Trek Model Kit Previews. He does do a video of this decal application. I'm going to follow his lead, particularly with applying them to the primary hull here, and go in alternating sections. And I think that's a good idea, so that way you allow one decal to set properly before having to maneuver anything that's adjacent to that. So we'll start off with sections 13, 15, 17, 18, excuse me, 19, and then alternate to the other sections there. Now it's good to have some sharp scissors, and what I did was I went on Amazon to find some smaller scissors that were pointed, and that way you can get around corners better. So I got these off of Amazon. I can't remember how much they were. They weren't very expensive, but these are the scissors I'll be using. I've got some tweezers ready and some brushes, so let's go ahead and get started. So I have to say the decals were easy to work with. I strongly suggest, however, that you adhere to the instructions which tell you to soak them in water for about a minute, then allow them to relax for up to 2 minutes before trying to place them on your model. Giving them that time to relax makes them easy to move them off to transfer paper. Well, it turns out right after I took that shot there with the decals completed, I did a light test, and one of the nacelles was not lighting up. And I was really bummed out about it. I pulled the board out, really hoping that it was not the LED, and thank goodness it wasn't. It turned out that one of the connections on the board failed. There are 2 B connections here, and these are provided for one for each LED inside of these nacelles. And so it was a matter of just flipping them to the one to the other, and as soon as you plugged whatever nacelle into the active connection, the nacelle lit up. So I knew right away that it wasn't the LEDs, thank goodness, and I called and contacted Polar Lights. They were very apologetic and really nice to speak to over the phone, and they're sending out a new board. Now, I had in conversation told my friend Ken Spriggs about this. He was kind enough to offer sending out his board from his Polar Lights lighting kit to me, and that way I could finish up the ship, the build, and the video, and then I could send him back the board that I'm getting from Polar Lights, which won't get here for about another week and a half. So that was very nice of him. I received his board today, plugged everything in, and it's all working. So we're finally ready to move on to the last stages of the build. All the wires are ready to be connected, and the last thing I always do when I build starships, is just a little tradition of mine, or a custom of mine, is I don't put the final registry, the big registry numbers, and the name on the ship until the model's completed. Well, now that the model is pretty much completed, the last step now is the display base. Let me just show you what I've been working on here. So this is the display base now that comes with the model kit, as I've indicated earlier. And I walked it over to my room and just trying to see where I would display this model. And this is a fairly large base to have to kind of find room for. So I did clear away the supports, as you see there, just for our battery pack. But after giving this some thought, I thought I would try to experiment and see if I can come up with something a little bit smaller. So what I have here is a container from the Container Store, and every time I'm walking around a place like that, I'm always looking for stuff that might be usable as a display base. So what I've done here now is I've inserted the plastic tubing, and that's where our mounting post is going to go. I'm going to use some 2-part epoxy putty to give us more support around that, and that should dry really solid. And what I've done here is added this wooden brace here just for a bit more support. And then what I have here is a cutout for the push switch. Looking at the surface here, what I've done is I've mounted a piece of styrene plastic, and I just took my scribing tool to create a pattern that looks like hull plating. And I've done the same thing here to the sides. What's cool is that this is a darker piece of plastic, so when I painted that silver and then scribed in the lines, the dark plastic came through the lines, and don't have to do any sort of wash to bring those out. They come right out. Yeah, so I'm going to work on this and see if this is enough support. I'll experiment a little bit with it before mounting the model, obviously, permanently into it. But I'm hoping this will work out, so we'll have something more compact. So after the stand was completed, it was time to apply the remaining decals that came with the kit. And now it's time to show you the final reveal. Okay guys, here's the completed Polar Lights 1/1000 scale model of the USS Enterprise, as was seen in the Season 1 ender of Discovery. This version will also be used in the upcoming Strange New World series following the adventures of Captain Pike and his crew. Now I think the design is very nice, which is why I chose to buy the kit. I think it's a great version of the Enterprise, which updates the ship while retaining elements from not only TOS, but reflects design features from the movies and Star Trek Enterprise. And these are what make it fit right into the timeline that we're all familiar with. Overall, I give this kit a very high grade regarding ease of construction and accuracy, at least based on what I have been able to compare with available screenshots of the ship. The model measures 17.5 inches in length, somewhat close to the old AMT Enterprise, making it a nice display size for your collection. So let me go ahead and divide this review into 3 parts: the kit itself, the decal sheets, and the lighting kit. Now, if you're not lighting this kit, this is a project that can be completed in 1 or 2 weekends. The instructions provided are very clear and straightforward, and I think the kit is well engineered, as is evident with how the pieces fit together. You'll find that the halves of the saucer, nacelle tubes, and secondary hull fit well, but there are seams to work on. These are along the top and bottom of the nacelles, front and back of the struts, front of the neck, and the bottom of the secondary hull, which is the most prominent one. The seam on top of the secondary hull is concealed and fits right in with the detailing, so that saves you from having to deal with it. There is a seam around the saucer, which you can leave as is. I ended up having to conceal mine because of some mishaps that I had while gluing the 2 halves together. Now bear in mind that the decal sheet will help conceal many of these seams, especially along the secondary hull and the nacelles, but I do think it's still worth your time to smooth them over as best you can, regardless. As you connect the 3 elements to each other, you'll find that easy to do as well, and all of these are very solid. I think they did a great job engineering the way the primary hull connects to the neck and the struts to the secondary hull, which, if you have any experience building the old AMT kits through the years, has been a challenge. And because of that, I don't think I'll have any problems with the nacelles sagging over time. So as I indicated in part 1 of this build, for painting I decided to follow Boyd's lead. This is Boyd from Truckworks, and he suggested using a color that matched the color of the plastic that the model was molded in. So for this, I used craft paints, as he suggested, and both colors that I used here were from Folk Art. I used Pewter for the base color, and the gunmetal for the darker accents. For the sensor dish, I used Vallejo's Brass. And one other thing I decided to do was to add a black wash to the grills along the struts, as well as those along the sides of the primary hull. For this, I used the black wash from Vallejo. So as you know, CGI ships can have a lot of detailing, and the one thing that stands out here is of course the Aztec paneling. And this can be obtained by either painting and masking or using the decal sheet that Polar Lights has available, and that's the way I decided to go here. The decal sheet was easy to use for the most part. I did feel it was a good suggestion to split up the ones on the primary hull, however, and I did try it both ways. All the ones along the bottom hull were split, and I did apply a couple on the top as a single piece. Applying them as a single piece wasn't too bad, but you just have a little more control with positioning if you separate them. I didn't find it necessary to split up any others, however. When it came to the nacelles and secondary hull, these went on pretty easily. The ones along the struts are a little awkward, but with some patience, you can get them to fit. As I mentioned at the beginning of the build, this is the first time I've ever tried applying decal sheets to this scale, and overall I'm very pleased with the end results. Once the decal application was completed, I did finish everything off with spraying on a 50-50 mix of Tester's gloss and dull coat, and this ended up giving me a satin finish, which I think tied everything together quite nicely. Okay, and finally now on to lighting. This is one area that I will be a little critical of, but let me start by saying if you are looking for a plug-and-play lighting kit and want to avoid any soldering, or you're just starting out with lighting, this is a very straightforward way to do it. And that is what they intended for here, and I think in the end you will end up with a nice looking model kit. So that is one advantage. It fulfills its promise of being easy to connect and work with. The other thing it accomplishes pretty well are the engine effects. With the 4.5 volt enclosure as your power source, I think the rotation speed is very good. Now at the onset, I was concerned they'd be spinning too fast, which is what happened when I tested them with a 9 volt. As soon as I hooked it up to a 4.5 volt source, however, they slowed to the very nice rotation speed you see here. Now some may prefer it even slower, but it's a pretty nice effect that we're getting here. And one other note here about the Basecolor collector is I did use the clear domes that came with the kit originally versus the ones that came with the lighting kit, which are red. I tinted the domes with an orange from Tamiya and also tinted the fan blades with a Tamiya's red. And I felt this combination worked really nice. I'm not sure exactly how the red ones look, but this gave me that amber color that I was looking for. And you can see the blades pretty well as they're spinning around. The main shortcoming of the system, I still feel, is the wire thickness, which comes back to haunt you, so to speak, in a couple ways. First, it makes it challenging to fit into the cramped spaces, both in the nacelles and especially the secondary hull. Further, because so much is jammed into the secondary hull, they somewhat obscure lighting of a number of the windows, resulting in uneven illumination. Now, it's probably realistic to expect that not all of the windows on a ship like this would always be the same brightness, but I think most modelers would want them to be uniformly lit. Another thing that doesn't work quite as well as I would want is the illumination provided for the blue chiller grills on the nacelles, which is also uneven. Now, I went into this with the commitment of seeing how the lighting kit installs without modification, and I stuck with that. However, if I were to do another one of these, which I may in the future, I would replace the bulbs with strip LEDs. It's possible that you could hook up the strip LEDs to the wires provided for connecting them to the board. That should work, but I would advise to check with Polar Lights first before attempting that, just in case. And lastly, this is how the stand turned out. As you know, I was looking for something with a smaller footprint. It's a pretty basic stand, and it was able to accommodate the battery pack within it. The lights are activated by the push switch, which I purchased from Evan Designs. Alright, well that pretty much wraps up this project, but before I go I wanted to mention a few things. First I want to pass along a little tip from modeler Bob Lyon. Now he was watching the first part of my build, and he wanted to share what he does with these clear pieces. In particular what we're talking about are the blue chillers here. A lot of Starship models, as you well know, have things like that, and the way he approaches these pieces is that he uses clear Tamiya blue for painting the clear piece, and then he also, after that is dried, applies a layer of white. And he's had very good luck with light diffusion by doing this. If you look at this picture, he uses strip LEDs, which no doubt helps out a lot. But as he lights it up, you can see pretty even light distribution throughout. So yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to try the next time I'm building up Starship. I'm not sure when that's going to be or which ship that's going to be. But in this case, I used that parchment paper. By the time I got the tip, it was already too late. The nacelle was already constructed. It might have worked a little better than the parchment paper, but I'll definitely give it a shot next time. Thanks, Bob, for passing it along. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I hope I didn't leave you with a negative impression of the model kit. As I was editing my review, I wanted to be sure that I didn't leave you with a negative impression, because it is really a great model to work with. I had a lot of fun working with it. A couple hiccups here and there, but nothing that was not manageable. Early on, I had a little concern that I was scratching the Bussard collector caps there as I was putting them on, and some people had mentioned that, oh, I could tell that you were a little stressed out about that, and yeah, you know, but if you're just careful with it, everything will turn out fine. It certainly turned out fine here, so just take a little care as you're handling that. Secondly, the lighting kit, of course, has its challenges, and I did run across that problem with the circuit board breaking down there. Polar Lights was great to talk to over the phone, and they are definitely sending another one out, and but as I mentioned, you know, I was able to finish this project thanks to Ken Spriggs. So I want to say a big thank you to Ken Spriggs for sending out his board. I definitely will send out mine to him as soon as I get mine. So thanks again for saving the day there. And lastly, I just want to wish you guys happy holidays. You know, this year was a challenging year for many of us, obviously, for all of us, really. And there's hopefully a lot of better things in store for 2021. I do want to thank you guys for watching the channel throughout the year, and I always appreciate all the kind comments that you guys leave. It's a pleasure to hear from you, and also a pleasure to get pictures of your work. So if you do or are inclined to send me pictures, definitely do that. I am hoping to share more of that on the channel this coming year. So thanks again for watching, you guys. I always appreciate it, and I wish you all the best this holiday season. I've got one last video coming up here. I'm going to do a brief video with Ken Spriggs, who's going to join me on this one, and I'll be posting it prior to the end of the year. It's just going to be a quick review of 2020 of some of the projects we worked on and some of the things we look forward to doing in 2021. I thought that would be fun to put on the channel. All right, thanks again for watching, you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.